Before proceeding with this video, I should warn that there will be light spoilers in regards to Far From Home, as well as some in regards to Spider-Man Homecoming, which is a 2-year-old film. Spider-Man Far From Home marks Tom Holland's 5th appearance in the MCU as the popular web slinger, and the second Spider-Man movie in the MCU. Early on, Kevin Feige hinted that subsequent Spider-Man sequels would be similar to Harry Potter, with each movie focusing on Peter being in high school and his adventures. I have always said that the MCU has had an almost unfair advantage with Tom Holland that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire did not have, in regards to Tom Holland still looking as young as he did when he first debuted as Spider-Man. But anyway, in regards to Far From Home, I finally got around to seeing the movie, which included me contributing to the Disney offering plate and seeing Spider-Man sling across the screen once more. Similarly to Homecoming, there's some things I like, dislike, and some things that left me confused. Tom Holland's Spider-Man has been well received as expected within the MCU fandom, but outside of that he has seen a mixed response. Far From Home shows that the MCU Spider-Man is in Tony Stark's shadow, whether we the audience like it or not, and that's something we're just going to have to get used to. At this rate, Spider-Man is a cemented character in the MCU, and regardless of what Sony decides to do next, his success here should mean that he'll have an extended stay in the universe going forward. We do get brief moments of him showing his knowledge in multiverses, as well as finding clever ways to stop bad guys, but I couldn't help but feel that these moments were a little too few and far between. His chemistry with the equally as awkward yet somehow likable MJ, is cool for the time being. I do like Zendaya in the role as I did in Homecoming, but nonetheless I feel that her knowing about Peter Parker and Spider-Man pales in comparison to, say, Spider-Man 2, because really it's just way too obvious for Michelle and the whole class not to know that Peter is Spider-Man. Aside from Betty Brant unusually resembling Gwen Stacy and Aunt May looking like a whole snack, Spider-Man Far From Home's best component is no doubt Jake Gyllenhaal as Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. He doesn't have much of a backstory, yet Far From Home does show his motivation, and as expected, it is directly tied back to Tony Stark. Gyllenhaal really does well as the villain in the movie, like Michael Keaton's Vulture before him. He's manipulative in the worst ways and believable in the best ones, that when his illusions come into play, I found myself still wondering if a certain scene was an illusion itself. It's a shame that his death means that for right now, we won't see him return in the inevitable Sinister Six scenario that the MCU is hinting towards, unless his death was an illusion itself. Nick Fury and Mariah Hill's inclusion doesn't add much aside from Samuel L. Jackson's usual humorous lines and him barking orders, yet it does feel good to know that the MCU hasn't abandoned Fury's character altogether. I think the action scenes were decent, the web slinging looked awkward, and seeing J.K. Simmons return as J. Jonah Jameson was interesting. And yet with all this, Far From Home is your typical MCU movie, which isn't to say that the movie is god-awful, but that it really just is another chapter in this ever-growing universe. Ultimately, even with Tony Stark no longer in the picture, the MCU Spider-Man makes certain that his presence is still felt in some form or fashion. The critique of Iron Boy / Iron Man Jr. does make sense in certain regards. Rather, I look at it from both perspectives. Peter Parker's comic version comes from humble beginnings and ultimately learned that with great power, there must also come great responsibility. The MCU decided against Uncle Ben's presence and ushered in Spider-Man with the help of Tony Stark, who has been like the father, not the father figure for Peter up until now. It is reasonable to expect that some fans might dislike this approach, as opposed to the more traditional approach, because even a nod to Uncle Ben or letting us know that he existed at some point would be nice to see. But on the flip side, no one really cares because after all, we wouldn't have got Spider-Man in an iron suit. With the elementals, I also feel this was a neat part of the film. Water, lava, and other realistic elements to cause and create mayhem made for some pretty cool scenes. CGI was spotty in some spots, but nothing too distracting, because after all, this won't get nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. To Far From Home's credit, I did like the chemistry between Peter and Quentin Beck. You can see that Peter really put his trust in Beck, and that ultimately Peter is still figuring out the best way to be a hero as well as be a high school student and honor his fallen mentor slash father not father's legacy. Beyond that though, there's not really much more to Far From Home. But again, the best parts are definitely Jake Gyllenhaal, Tom Holland, as well as the Elementals and J.K. Simmons' surprise appearance. It's not quite the sequel that Spider-Man 2 is, and I sincerely hope Kevin Feige's statements of a Peter Parker story that has never been done before on film means that the third time will be a charm for Tom Holland in the MCU.